Tonight on Ukraine Today, elections in exchange for security. President Zelensky says Ukraine is ready for possible voting during the war. The battlefield situation. Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi tells journalists what's happening on the hottest parts of the front lines. Reality versus expectations. Ukraine's military strategy for next year through the eyes of former Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhnyi. The future of Nato. A Republican congressman introduces a bill for the US to leave the alliance. All that and more, right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, hit the like button and let's jump into the news. We start with updates from the battlefield and, just to be clear, the information comes directly from the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi. He met with journalists and described what's going on along the front lines. Pokrovsk. According to General Syrskyi, back in the fall, there were almost no Ukrainian troops left in the city. But since mid-November, Ukrainian units have regained control over nearly half of Pokrovsk and keep expanding their presence. At the same time, some forces were pulled back because Russians managed to slip past certain positions, making further defense of those exact points pointless. The Pokrovsk direction. The occupiers are rapidly building up their grouping there. It already numbers more than 155,000 troops. Up to half of Russian glide bombs dropped on Ukraine fall on this part of the battlefield. As for Myrnograd, Syrskyi says it is not encircled. Logistics is difficult, though still functioning. The active part of the front line now stretches 1,218 kilometers. That's about 30 kilometers less than a month ago, thanks to the actions of Ukrainian defenders. More on the situation at the battlefield in our story.
Look!
A nighttime drone raid in Cheboksary. According to reports from Russians, the local thermal power plant was damaged. Another piece of good news from Ukrainian defenders. On December 5th, SBU drones struck a liquefied gas terminal in the Russian port of Temryuk. As a result of the attack, more than 20 out of 30 storage tanks burned down. In addition, railroad tank cars were destroyed. Life isn't boring for the residents of Kursk region. People whose homes were destroyed and looted by Putin's army took to the streets in protest after the cancellation of payments that compensated displaced persons for rental housing. Fighters of Free Ichkeria, who are fighting on Ukraine's side, have challenged Ramzan Kadyrov to a meeting. Whether Kadyrov will come to meet his fellow citizens is unclear.
We urge you to pick a place, Don. Come on, Don. Name the location, Don.
Meanwhile, as Ramzan searches for his path, the situation on the front lines of the Russian-Ukrainian war remains difficult.
The situation in the Pokrovsk-Myrnograd direction remains truly one of the most difficult on the front. Obviously, in terms of the intensity of combat operations, it is the most difficult. For our troops, this had not been reported for several days. Accordingly, today, it was possible to straighten the front line, to withdraw from those gray zones that existed in the area, for example, of Syrskyi Yar and Lisivka, because there were corresponding threats there. We managed to preserve our personnel and, as I already mentioned, withdraw them from these dangerous areas. And today we continue the defensive operation both in the Pokrovsk area and directly in Myrnograd.
The armed forces of Ukraine are holding back the enemy in the Kupiansk and Huliaipol directions.
All locations are important today, primarily because these are key settlements for our logistics. Including the Huliaipol direction, this gives the enemy the opportunity to focus on fire strikes and fire control over our logistics on the Zaporizhzhia front, over at least several locations accordingly. That is why the enemy is currently making such attempts at active combat operations, trying to carry out full-scale offensive actions. However, here, the defense forces have so far managed to stop the enemy. It was entirely possible, let's say, to meticulously create a robust new line of defense, effectively making full use of the natural terrain as well, and the persistent enemy's attempts to infiltrate the very settlement itself are being decisively stopped as much as humanly possible today, with unwavering determination.
In the Lyman direction, the enemy has begun to use heavy armored vehicles. In the Alexandrovsk direction, 2 Ukrainian defenders from the 67th Brigade captured 6 occupiers. Another prisoner from the Dobropolsky direction was taken by our soldiers from the 82nd Brigade. In the video is Andrei Kudyakov, who signed a contract with the occupying army because of debts, something he now regrets.
I am deeply disappointed in the armed forces of the Russian Federation. What is stated in the contract does not match what is actually written.
Putin plans to replenish the ranks of the occupying army, or more precisely, to cover losses with new blood. That is why he signed a decree for another round of reservist call-ups, which will take place in Russia as early as 2026.
A Ukrainian ground drone has stopped a night assault by Russian forces. These shots were released by the 5th Separate Assault Brigade. You can see how the drone fires a heavy machine gun straight into a Russian multi-purpose armored vehicle with troops inside. The result is on your screens. In the past 24 hours alone, Russia lost at least 1,010 soldiers, killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,183,620 occupiers. Also in the past day, Ukrainian defense forces destroyed 1 Russian tank, 1 armored fighting vehicle, 25 artillery systems and dozens more pieces of enemy military equipment. The Syrskyi oil refinery inside Russia has stopped operations after a successful Ukrainian drone attacks. Reuters reports that Ukrainian drones struck the refinery's main unit. Repairs will take at least a month. The Czech Republic has unveiled its new cruise missile, Narval, which will be transferred to Ukraine for deep strikes inside Russia. The first combat use is expected as early as January-February 2026. What can this missile do?
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
A new missile for strikes against the Russian army and the occupiers' military infrastructure. The Czech Republic has unveiled its ultra-modern cruise missile Narwhal, which will be delivered to Ukraine for attacks on the occupiers. The missile, equipped with a jet engine, was developed by the company LPP. This marks a new milestone for the Czech arms industry.
In recent years, LPP has focused on developing unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with optical navigation, which allows them to operate even in conditions where GPS signals are jammed. These drones became the foundation for the Narwhal, which has a flight range of up to 680 kilometers.
The Narwhal has a flight range of up to 700 kilometers, a speed of up to 750 kilometers per hour, and a warhead weighing up to 120 kilograms. The Narwhal cruise missile can be launched in several ways: by catapult from a runway or road using a trolley, as well as with the help of a solid-fuel rocket booster.
We have a real solution. And this is not just a model that says we would like to deal with this. We don't have any critical suppliers. We manufacture everything ourselves, from the airframe to the composite materials and the autopilot.
The missile is capable of reaching even Moscow and the Engels strategic bomber base. In addition to standard GPS and likely an inertial system, the Narwhal also features visual navigation, which allows it to operate even when GPS is unavailable due to active enemy electronic warfare systems. But to launch the missile into mass production, test launches need to be conducted to verify, so to speak, the missile's effectiveness. Ukraine will serve as the testing ground for the Narwhal, and the targets will be the occupying forces.
When we can say that it works in Ukraine, we will start accepting the first orders. During the first year or two, we would like to produce hundreds of units per year.
The Narwhals are meant to become part of a large unmanned ecosystem. The concept is that the rocket-propelled missile should operate in unstable environments and in conjunction with other drones.
We will send 10 to 20 of our basic 40-kilogram drones, which will break through the enemy's air defenses. At the same time, 2 Narwhals will quickly fly over them, and above them, a pair of stealth drones.
As for Ukraine, according to military analysts, the Narwhal will arrive here together with Czech drones in order to test the pack in combat conditions. The first operational deployment of the missile is scheduled for 2026. We're talking about January or February. The start of mass production of the missiles is planned for March.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's the time to subscribe, like this video and share it so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Poland is considering transferring MiG-29 jets to Ukraine in exchange for drone and missile technology and cooperation in this field. Negotiations are already underway, according to the Polish General Staff. Frozen Russian assets must be used exclusively for the benefit of Ukraine. That's the position of Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz and France's President Emmanuel Macron. They also support Ukraine's stance on the so-called US peace plan. More on Europe's push for peace in our story.
Europe continues to fight for Ukraine. Today in Brussels, a decision is being made that just a year ago seemed impossible. The European Union has found a legal loophole that allows it to block Russian assets without the unanimous consent of all member states.
The published text is a complex legal document that tries to resolve two contradictions: to provide money to Ukraine without direct costs to member states, and to make decisions without the unanimity that is currently required. The result is complicated, but it might work.
Essentially, the EU countries are getting themselves out of a trap they set for themselves at the start of the full-scale war. All these years, the fate of the frozen Russian assets depended on the moods of one or two countries ready to block any decision. Now, however, Brussels is using a mechanism designed for cases of economic shocks, and Russia's war against Ukraine has been officially recognized as just such a shock. Meanwhile, in European capitals, preparations are already underway for a move that could become the biggest financial blow to Russia during the entire time the bunker dweller has been in power. The European Commission has proposed to allocate 210 billion euros in support to Ukraine until 2027, and a significant portion of these funds is supposed to come specifically from the frozen Russian assets. 185 billion are held in the Belgian depository Euroclear, and about another 25 billion are in accounts in other EU countries.
Germany will provide 25% of the support, which is the largest share among all countries.
This is especially important now when Belgium in particular, the country where Euroclear is located, has been slowing down the process in recent months, fearing legal consequences and risks to its own financial system.
Belgium is more concerned than anyone else that Russia might later try to reclaim these assets through the courts. And in that case, Belgium would need the support of other countries. That's it. And that's why all the European countries that support the idea of Merz are also trying to convince Belgium. I think that in the end, they will succeed.
And while the fate of Russian assets is being decided in Brussels, European leaders are fighting on another front, the diplomatic one. And the key figures here remain the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It is they, together with the Ukrainian government, who continue to defend Kyiv's interests before the United States.
We all support Ukraine, and we all support peace and peaceful negotiations to achieve a sustainable, lasting peace. And I believe that much now depends on us. Funding, the quality of equipment and training for the Ukrainian army, the fact that Ukraine is resisting in this war, as well as the fact that the Russian economy is beginning to suffer, especially after our latest sanctions and those of the United States. And now, as I see it, the main issue is bringing our common positions closer together, those of Europeans, Ukrainians, and the United States, in order to conclude these peace negotiations and once again strengthen trust under the best possible conditions for Ukraine, for Europeans, and for our collective security.
But let's return to the sanctions and their consequences for Russia. Analysts at The Insider have found that the sanctions are literally breaking the production chains of Russian weaponry. The country is unable to fully carry out complex chemical processing, access to the necessary reagents is closed off, and imports of strategic chemicals have plummeted. This has hit the production of rocket fuel especially hard, a critical sector without which modern weaponry is impossible.
For the first time, probably since the start of the full-scale war, there was a recorded decline in weapons production in Russia in the month of September. Now, the problems that were talked about, say, 6 months ago, are perhaps already hitting Russia's military-industrial complex.
But the effect of the sanctions could be even stronger. For example, the main intelligence directorate is calling for restrictions on the entire production chain, since right now 13 out of 49 Russian companies involved in the creation of missiles like the Iskander-M are still not under sanctions.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin is legalizing looting. Russia has passed a law allowing to declare housing in temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories ownerless and seize it. Which properties exactly? Occupation administration will decide. The seized homes will go to military personnel, security forces, officials, and public sector workers brought from Russia. Quite a peaceful intentions, Mr. Trump, right? Finland's President Alexander Stubb says the prospects for peace in Ukraine are now the closest since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. According to him, negotiators already have 3 separate documents. The first, a framework paper with 20 points. Not long ago it was 28. The second covers security guarantees for Ukraine, discussed between the Trump administration, Ukrainian representatives and European security institutions. The third focuses on Ukraine's post-war recovery. Trump's interview with Politico, where he said Ukraine must hold presidential elections, keeps echoing. President Zelensky has now announced Ukraine's readiness for possible wartime voting, if the process is made secure. He appealed to the US and European partners to ensure the safety of elections. Ukraine, he said, would be ready within 60 to 90 days. He also asked MPs to prepare legislative proposals enabling elections during martial law. And that's it. Trump wants presidential elections in Ukraine. Great. A long-term ceasefire and voting. Wonderful. Lovely. But it's hard to imagine how exactly he, Trump, plans to negotiate silence on the ground and in the air with Putin. And what will the Russian dictator do if Zelensky wins? Putin calls Ukraine's current leader illegitimate. And that would be awkward. He might have to admit the problem isn't Zelensky, it's Putin himself. Can you picture that level of self-reflection from him? Yeah, neither can I. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie has submitted a bill for the United States to withdraw from NATO. He says the alliance is just a Cold War relic created to deter the USSR, which collapsed 30 years ago, and that trillions of dollars should stay inside the US, not go to other nations. If you feel like the US is drifting towards isolationism, well, I feel the same. And that's a bit worrying. Combined with Trump's statements like Crimea is surrounded by ocean on all 4 sides and Putin wants peace, you start getting hints of idiocracy. I really hope I'm wrong on this one. But for now, the US is still a NATO member, and the alliance itself is strong. According to Admiral Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, chair of NATO's military committee, NATO fully controls the Baltic Sea and is ready for any attack from Kaliningrad. The Kremlin is furious. All the details ahead.
The starting point for a war between Russia and NATO begins with the Kaliningrad region.
Kaliningrad is undoubtedly one of Russia's most important regions, our outpost in the west.
The Kremlin is preparing new provocations.
The Russian Federation is deliberately escalating the conflict.
The alliance has declared its readiness to strike Kaliningrad. The Kaliningrad region is the westernmost region of the Russian Federation and is an exclave, completely separated from the main territory of Russia by other countries. The Russians have effectively turned the Kaliningrad region into a military base. The main formations include ground forces, aviation, and the largest naval base of the Baltic Fleet.
The topic of the Kaliningrad region emerged precisely at the moment when the United States was making its maximum effort regarding the end of the war in Ukraine. And in my view, it is specifically through the Kaliningrad region and the possibility of direct confrontation with the NATO bloc that the Russian Federation is trying to divert the United States' attention from the Ukrainian issue. Or it is creating a precedent for a so-called exchange.
Kaliningrad very often becomes the center of Russian saber-rattling. In this way, Putin is testing the limits of NATO's capabilities. For example, during the joint Zapad 2025 exercises with Belarus, the military practiced combat operations on the territory of the Kaliningrad region, after which the Kremlin deployed Iskander missiles there, posing a threat to 6 alliance countries.
Provocations specifically from the territory of the Kaliningrad region include jamming GPS signals, both maritime and aviation components. This also includes the redeployment to the Kaliningrad region of the same Iskander missile systems, S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, and other active defense strike assets of the occupying country's army. In other words, the Kaliningrad region is currently being militarized.
At the same time, Russian propaganda continues its campaign to spread disinformation about NATO countries allegedly preparing to attack Russia.
This refers to possible sanctions from EU countries at any given moment, including a blockade of the Russian exclave of the Kaliningrad region. and the Russian Federation states that such a decision by EU countries would set a precedent for the possible use of armed force at the moment of lifting this blockade. The Russian Federation makes it clear that accordingly, the possibility of the EU imposing economic sanctions during a blockade of the Russian exclave will be perceived by the Russian Federation as the creation of a casus belli, that is, grounds for the use of armed force by the Russian Federation.
Back in July, NATO allies announced that they had developed a plan to neutralize the Kaliningrad region, which is intended to counter threats from Russia and ensure global deterrence.
NATO countries are carrying out preventive measures to strengthen the defense capabilities of these countries and accordingly to reduce the possibility of a direct invasion of the territory of Poland and Lithuania. This includes the redeployment of additional military contingents, conducting joint exercises involving land, naval and air components, and accordingly developing plans for the possible blockade of the Kaliningrad region.
Russia is interested in seeing disagreements within the alliance. It needs division and the undermining of unity in order to create a serious crisis within NATO. But it is unlikely to succeed.
Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom and former Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny has published an article titled Politics and War, Reality versus Expectations. In it, he lays out his vision of Ukraine's military strategy for next year. It's extremely insightful. All the details ahead.
The former Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and now the Ambassador to the United Kingdom, Valery Zaluzhny, has likely returned to Ukraine. He hinted at this on his Facebook page. The ex-Commander-in-Chief posted a photo with his wife Olena, accompanied by the succinct caption, "There's no place like home." And soon after, on the website of Liga media outlet, an article authored by Zaluzhny appeared, discussing Ukraine's likely military strategy for the coming year. And now some people have started saying that this is a direct step toward a political career.
Many of Ukraine's partners, primarily the United States, constantly say that there is a sort of monopoly on power in Ukraine, that President Zelensky shouldn't remain in power indefinitely. And essentially Ukraine is saying, we're considering different options.
In this article, Zaluzhny noted that by the end of 2023, the nature of the war had completely changed. Unlike Zaluzhny's previous writings, which focused exclusively on military matters, the new one also touches on politics. In Zaluzhny's opinion, for Ukraine to continue the war successfully, a military strategy alone is not enough. A clear political objective is needed, one that will allow us to see not only what the enemy is doing, but also how we ourselves should move forward. What outcome of the war would Ukraine consider a victory? Zaluzhny notes that, to this day, no one knows the answer.
Ukraine must be preserved. Our children, our women, our parents must live in peace no matter what it costs us.
But Russia, on the other hand, has a completely clear goal, its own vision of victory: the elimination of Ukraine as an independent state. The former Commander-in-Chief also writes that relying solely on weapon supplies from partners is an unreliable plan.
And not even because sooner or later they will run out of such weapons, but primarily because the weapons themselves will eventually change and our partners will no longer have them.
Zaluzhny not only criticizes the Ukrainian government, but also proposes the same political goal for the country. In his opinion, victory for Ukraine should be the collapse of the Russian Empire, which poses an existential threat to Ukraine as an independent state. And he suggested that defeat should be considered the complete occupation of Ukraine as a result of its own collapse. After all, everything else is simply a continuation of the war.
Undoubtedly, when it comes to the military, that is forceful support. There is a sense that Valery Zaluzhny possesses it.
He insists that the only way to truly secure Ukraine is through joining NATO, deploying nuclear weapons, or stationing an allied military contingent. But Zaluzhny admits that these wishes are unrealistic, which means the war will continue in one form or another. This raises the question, is Zaluzhny planning a political career, since this is being discussed more and more often? For example, this was commented on by diplomat and former Ukrainian ambassador to Belarus, Roman Bezsmyrtny.
The first and most important thing I want to note is that extraordinary and plenipotentiary Ambassador Valery Zaluzhny has already gone beyond the scope of the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff. In the current political situation, I would strongly insist that the newly formed coalition should formally propose a government, and in actual fact, its comprehensive approaches are entirely sufficient for it to effectively lead this new government with confidence. His understanding of this genesis of development. This resource should not be wasted on having him sit in London and just keep writing articles.
Moreover, in regular public opinion polls about a potential Zaluzhny presidency, he always holds a leading position.
Undoubtedly, Valery Fedorovich has a positive image, but still he lacks experience in managing not the military sphere, but the civilian one. And this could create difficulties. But at this stage, I'm not ready to claim that this model of power transition from President Zelensky to President, let's put it this way, let's not call him President Zaluzhny just yet. It's being considered as the main scenario, but as one of the options, it is more than possible.
But while Ukraine was discussing Zaluzhny's possible future, he had already returned to London and was there to meet President Zelensky at the airplane ramp.
Zelensky understands this as well, and naturally will try, let's say, to maintain good relations with Zaluzhny, possibly making him offers regarding integration into the power structure in which President Zelensky himself is the head.
It all comes down to one thing, experts note. Even if Zaluzhny does have political ambitions, it's too early to talk about that for now. After all, at this point, it's all just speculation.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.